of that. Pasha joined me for this conversation at the CBC studios in Toronto. Hey Pasha, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good, Matea. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Thank you for making the trek into the office. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a privilege to be.
I want to start off with the opening scene of the novel because immediately we're plunged into a very surreal experience. We start off with this unnamed narrator and his accidental companion floating through the sky, kind of like these human balloons just drifting. And they end up landing and ending up on this desert island, and things kick off from there and only get weirder. I'm wondering what inspired this opening scene for you. Is there anything in particular you were drawing on in crafting this image?
Yeah, the opening scene is, this is a kind of unofficial sequel to my last novel, Kill Them All. And I laugh because the title is so stupid. It was a placeholder title, and then I just kept it because I thought it was so dumb that it was, I don't know if it's smart, but it entertained me enough to keep it. And that book ends with these two characters floating up out of the mall. And I wrote that book after having written two novels that took me a combined 14 years. And I wanted to write something sort of quick and dirty and fun. So I set up this scheme where I would write a novel in 12 parts, write one part per month, and then whatever came out would be the finished product. And so that was that novel. I had so much fun writing it that then when, lockdown started in early 2020 and fun was sort of hard to be found, I returned to the voice and the character and just kind of continued the story from where I left off. And the whole plan with these books is that there is no plan. Like, it's really just a kind of, I bore this turn from an Argentine writer I really like, Cesar Aira, who calls it the flight forward, where there's no outline, there's no even like preconceived notions of what you want the story to be. You just sort of follow each action or language or rhythms or imagery. And so, yeah, they were floating, and they continued to float, and then they ended up on an island, and then I had to sort of figure out what was on the island. And I really didn't, I know the book is being talked about as kind of, it's about, wellness retreats or whatever, and that was not the intention. I didn't go into this thinking I'm going to satirize wellness retreats. I did go in with this open spirit of just wanting to see what would happen. I mean, it's like this, the ultimate in speculative fiction is just like, an open-ended what-if question. So yeah, I that's where it began, and then where it went was probably as big a surprise to me as it would be to the reader, I imagine.
I think absurdist storytelling specifically can be challenging for certain readers who like to have a clear box that they can put a novel into. And I found when I was describing to friends, okay, well, what am I reading for work right now? I found myself just sort of describing the events of the book as opposed to being able to summarize it in a sort of neat package of like, this is a book about blank. I'm wondering, when you're writing these absurdist stories that, as you say, were just kind of flowing out of you and you didn't even necessarily know at the outset where things were going to go, do you have to create, are there any rules around that? Like, did you find yourself imposing certain boundaries on where the story would go in order to kind of make it into a book, or did you just really let the creative passion take you where it wanted to go?
Yeah, no, I really just let it go. I mean, I if there's any sort of parameters for the book, it's the parameter of like disabusing myself of preconceived notions of what I think a story should be. Absurdism as a strategy, like an aesthetic strategy or maybe a political strategy, is to me, if I want to be, put on an academic hat and talk about my own work, I mean, it's really a response to a broader culture that I feel like in many ways precludes rational explanation, or explanation. Like, I go to absurdism the way that some of the early Soviet writers responded to totalitarianism in the Soviet Union with absurdism. It's a way of undoing logic, the supposed logic, or responding to it in a kind of conventional strategy. So I guess, like, that's serious answer. The other answer is like, I just wanted to have fun. You know, I wanted to make myself laugh. Like my partner will tell you that, you know, she could hear me up in the office like cackling as I was writing. And that's really, you know, it's not something that is that common for me in my writing practice. Like certainly other books in the book, I just finished another manuscript for a novel I'm working on. Like they're not joyful in the same way. The joy comes in out of different things. And this was just like a joy play, an invention that I was trying to capture in a way that I felt like was sort of like childhood, you know, like the way that children play with story. And it was fun. You know, it was just like I was just trying to have fun.
I think the sort of duality of this silly answer, serious answer really does capture what this book does, because there were parts of it that were extremely unsettling to read and quite disturbing. But there were also parts of it that were fun and brought me as a reader back to that sort of childlike place. Like specifically, there are some really incredible like long lists of adjectives or imaginary titles of things where I was just kind of sitting and like chuckling myself. This is a whole page of like nothing's happening in the plot, but this is fun to just read these words put together. I want to talk about this sort of plot insofar as we can describe the plot of the novel. There's this wellness retreat, and specifically it specializes in like erotic couples counseling. And our two main characters are not a couple. They've been thrust into this situation where they are together, they have to pretend like they're supposed to be there, and they are here to work on their relationship. We have this unnamed male narrator with a woman named Kay Sahara. As you've said, this is a bit of an unofficial sequel to your previous book, Kill Them All, which also features, I guess, these same two characters. How would you describe the relationship between these two people? Because they're a fascinating duo.
I mean, I think the narrator would have a different version of what their relationship is to what Kay Sahara would say their relationship is. They are, you know, per the marketing copy, accidental companions. They sort of escape this mall together. They're, you know, physically bound together at the start of the book. And I think they have a sense of sort of duty to one another that is sort of forced upon them by, you know, external circumstances. Yeah, I wouldn't characterize it as like a romantic relationship or even a friendship, but it's just this sort of like two people who are lost in this place together, so they have each other and they need each other. So, you know, not to give away the plot such as it is, but you know, they separate and come back together almost by necessity toward the end of the book.
I'm wondering, you know, we've talked a little bit about the power of absurdist fiction to reckon with some of the true absurd, I would say, horrors of living in the 21st century. I would say that All You Can Kill, to me as a reader, fits into a lineage of satire and a lineage of absurdist novels. But that then begs the question, is there anything in particular that's being sent up in this novel? Because as you said, you didn't set out to write a novel necessarily that was sending up like wellness culture in particular. So looking back now at this piece of work that you've put together, do you think there is a directed critique of anything in particular in it?
No, I really don't. And I mean, I think that the book is much more, and I think my work in general has been much more interested in parody rather than satire. And Vladimir Nabokov makes the distinction that satire is a lesson, parody is a game. And I don't have any lessons to teach anybody, but you know, I'm interested in parody as a way to play within spaces and forms and with tropes. So, you know, I love conventional horror movies. I love them, you know, good ones. There are a lot of bad ones. I'm not interested in satirizing horror, but I'm interested in using some of the tropes of horror to explore dynamics between people, to tell some jokes, to maybe examine some of the excesses and grotesqueries of like late stage capitalism. I'm doing air quotes on the radio, which is not that effective, but imagine the quotes around late stage capitalism. So yeah, it's definitely not, to me, work of satire in the way that you know, Jonathan Swift would have written satire, or Orwell or something like that. So yeah, more an instinct toward, you know, games than lessons, I suppose.
If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Pasha Mala, and he's got a new book out called All You Can Kill. Pasha, we're speaking a bit about lineages in this conversation and the origins of your writing. And so I'm actually curious to hear a bit more about your childhood and your beginnings as a writer. I understand you were born in St. John's, but spent a lot of your formative years in London, Ontario, and also that your parents, I think both were immigrants, like your father from Kashmir and your mom from Great Britain.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. What was your sort of growing up experience like in terms of your relationship with literature? Was writing something you were doing from early on? Was that something your parents had a relationship with?
Yeah, both my parents are lifelong readers and writers too. They're both very good writers. And we had, you know, I mean, it's a classic writer story, but we had books all over the house we were read to, and I read ravenously as a kid. I was telling someone the other day I had this, you know, freezer bag, Ziploc bag, that was for shower reading, so I could put my book inside the Ziploc bag so I could continue to read while I was showering. You know, I would sneak a book under the table and try to read during meals, and so yeah, I was always a really avid reader, and you know, I drew a lot as a kid, and just loved stories and storytelling, and you know, wrote my first novel, I put that in air quotes again, when I was like 9 or off through and through, just with like brown kids. um, and yeah, so from a very early age, I was interested in doing this. I joke that when I was 5, I told my mom that I either wanted to be an astronaut, in a motorcycle gang, or an author. And I wasn't good at science or math, so the astronaut thing was out. And I wasn't very tough, so I couldn't be in a biker gang. So author was a pretty good choice of those three.
It's interesting you mentioned that this sort of first novel, and I'm going to do the air quotes now too, was Narnia but with brown kids. Because the one thing I've noticed in your work is you have a lot of characters where they're non-white